In the early 1990s, Escobar was at the very center of the Colombian cartel wars. For a decade, his empire controlled a significant part of the global criminal market. However, in 1993, he found himself in a difficult situation. From childhood, Escobar was ambitious and ruthless. Quickly rising through the criminal ranks, he became one of the wealthiest people in the world. However, his empire always relied on violence. Colombia was embroiled in a brutal war at the time. The government, supported by the United States, was engaged in an unrelenting battle with the cartels. During this time, Escobar was trying to maintain his power, but the government was gradually gaining strength. One of Pablo's main goals was to achieve the adoption of a new constitution, which effectively excluded extradition of citizens to the U.S. Extradition was his biggest threat. American authorities persistently demanded his extradition, intending to hold him accountable for numerous crimes. For Escobar, the prospect of being extradited to the U.S. meant inevitable life imprisonment. He used his financial and political resources to resist this by all means possible. In attempts to strengthen his position, he even offered to pay off Colombia's national debt in exchange for stopping the prosecution. However, the Colombian government was against it. Tensions grew both within the country and on the international stage. In 1989, his people organized an assassination attempt on the future president, Cesar Gaviria. This caused international outrage and only increased the pressure on the government. In response, the state launched a large-scale campaign against criminal organizations, even involving the armed forces. Escobar's internal problems were also mounting. His closest allies began to turn away from him. The cartels started competing, and his family was at risk. At the same time, the government carried out targeted operations, dismantling his business infrastructure and arresting many of his close associates. The king of a massive cartel, one of the most influential criminals in the world, was under intense pressure. His business suffered significant losses due to police raids. But the greatest threat remained extradition to the United States. The adoption of the new constitution in 1991 changed everything. Now, extradition of Colombian citizens to other countries was prohibited. This was a long-awaited opportunity for Escobar. He offered a deal: voluntary surrender to the authorities in exchange for a guarantee that he would not be extradited to the United States. Escobar understood that this was his only chance to avoid life imprisonment in the U.S. and maintain control over the cartel. Pablo Escobar officially surrendered to Colombian authorities. But the conditions of his imprisonment were unique. He was sent to a specially built prison. This prison was located in a picturesque area on the outskirts of Medellin. It was literally created under Escobar's own direction. On its grounds were luxurious apartments, a private gym, a soccer field, and a bar. Escobar lived in comfort, surrounded by his people and servants. At first glance, this arrangement seemed like a compromise beneficial for all parties. Escobar avoided extradition, and the Colombian government could claim his arrest as a victory in the fight against criminal organizations. However, in reality, Pablo continued to run his cartel from prison. He remained in contact with the outside world through trusted associates, continued to control financial flows, and made key business decisions. For him, this prison was less a punishment and more a convenient shelter from the outside world, where he could enjoy comfort and security. Yet his decision to surrender was not without consequences. Disagreements began to grow within the cartel. Many of his partners felt betrayed and feared that such a decision would undermine their authority. Leaders of other cartels saw this as an opportunity to strengthen their own positions, and influential figures began to doubt whether Pablo could effectively manage his business from prison. Escobar's family also suffered from this decision. Although he managed to secure relative safety for them, government forces and enemies continued to exert pressure. His wife and children were under constant threat of attack or arrest. Escobar himself realized that his family was now vulnerable. Despite the apparent success, the Colombian government was also not fully satisfied. Although Pablo was in prison, his living conditions provoked public outrage and raised questions about the government's authority. Many felt that the state had made too many concessions, with particularly harsh criticism from the United States. The Americans couldn't accept that a man responsible for numerous crimes continued to run his business and evade justice. For them, Escobar's surrender under these conditions was a failure, as they had insisted on his extradition. But everything changed in 1992 when Pablo decided to escape. Escobar's escape from prison became the climax of his standoff with the state. Under pressure from the US and public dissatisfaction, the Colombian government began to reconsider his prison conditions. Within a year of his surrender, it became clear that the prison was more of a residence for him than a place of confinement. Orders continued to come from there to eliminate competitors, and Escobar's influence persisted, though weakened. Eventually, the Colombian government decided that this situation was unacceptable and proposed transferring Pablo to a more secure prison that would truly limit his power. Pablo learned of the government's plans, which presented a serious threat to him. If he were transferred to a regular prison, he would lose control of his business and become vulnerable to his rivals. Escobar made the decision to escape, realizing he could no longer trust the government. Pablo began devising a plan. His personal guards, who worked for him even in prison, helped him. He had prepared escape routes and contacts in case of an emergency. His closest allies on the outside supported the plan, understanding that if their leader ended up in a real prison, the entire Medellin cartel empire might collapse. Word spread that government forces were already preparing for his transfer. Escobar then easily bypassed all security measures and escaped. This was a demonstration of how weak the control measures over him were. The Colombian government found itself in a humiliating position. Their most high-profile arrest had turned into an escape. The US, in turn, further intensified demands to capture Escobar. An international manhunt was launched for Pablo, involving both the Colombian armed forces and American intelligence agencies. Competing cartels began to actively work against him. They entered into unofficial agreements with the Americans, providing information on his location and movements. For the US, this was a beneficial alliance. In exchange for weakening the Medellin cartel, they obtained data on its leader. This complicated Escobar's life, as he could no longer rely on his former power and influence. After the escape, Pablo tried to find a safe haven for himself and his family. One of his main goals was Germany. This decision was not random. Escobar hoped that a European country could grant him political asylum. He thought that Germany, known for its bureaucracy and legal protection for refugees, might protect him from extradition. However, the German authorities refused him. It then became clear to Escobar that he had no support left, even on the international stage, forcing him to seek other ways to survive. His family was in extreme danger, his wife and children forced to go into hiding, moving between countries and constantly under threat. Numerous attempts to secure the family's safety through bribes to officials failed. His family became a weak point, and his enemies quickly realized this. After his escape, Escobar began hiding in various secret locations in Medellin. He hid in houses, constantly changing his location. Both Colombian troops and American agents were hunting him. Escobar was now forced to live as a fugitive, constantly on edge and in fear. His life had drastically changed. There were no more luxurious mansions or extensive security. Only a few loyal people willing to go all the way with him remained. The prison escape marked the beginning of Escobar's downfall. With each passing week, he lost control over his empire, and his enemies increased the pressure. Competitors, with US support, strengthened their positions, while the Medellin cartel gradually weakened. Escobar was left alone without reliable allies and under the threat of imminent arrest. A year had passed. Pablo Escobar was celebrating his 44th birthday. But this time, it wasn't a celebration, but a day filled with a deep sense of loneliness. Since escaping prison, his life had changed dramatically. Escobar was staying on the outskirts of Medellin in one of his last hideouts, concealed among local streets. Pablo had few resources, so he was on the brink of both physical and emotional exhaustion. The family he had always treasured was under strict surveillance by Colombian authorities and US Special Forces. Contacting them was extremely dangerous. Nevertheless, family remained a priority for Escobar, and despite the risks, he tried to find ways to get in touch with them. That morning, Pablo woke up in a state of anxiety. His sleep was shallow, and every rustle or sound outside the window caused fearful thoughts that he might soon be found. Over the last few months, the hunt for him had intensified. Authorities targeted anyone even slightly connected to Escobar. The CIA was heavily involved in the operation, increasing surveillance on all forms of communication, especially phone calls that could reveal his whereabouts. In the first half of the day, Pablo, as always, moved between his hideouts, avoiding the use of vehicles to prevent drawing attention. By 11 o'clock, Pablo settled in one of his hideouts, where he considered calling his family. On his birthday, he had a special desire to hear their voices. Pablo picked up the phone. He knew the line could be tapped, but the desire to hear his children's voices made him take the risk. When he called, Pablo spoke quietly, avoiding long conversations and using code words. Escobar struggled to contain his emotions. He asked about the children and tried to reassure them, but the call lasted only 2 minutes. After the call, Escobar was once again surrounded by silence. This moment was especially painful for him. He understood that he would not be able to see his family and spend time with them on his special day. Information about the call soon reached intelligence agencies. They learned that Pablo was still in Medellin, so they intensified their search operation. Colombian military forces, along with American agents, began to mobilize in the city. However, they still lacked precise information about his location. By this time, Escobar was under extreme tension. He understood that he was being closely watched, and around 5 o'clock in the evening, he decided to move to a new hideout. Every time Pablo moved around the city, he risked being spotted, but staying in one place was even more dangerous. Escobar decided to call his family. His last hope was to convince them to leave Colombia and start a new life in another country. He knew that abroad he could find refuge, but his pride and sense of belonging to Medellin prevented him from leaving his homeland. When Escobar made the call, the signal was intercepted by the police. Rapid response teams immediately began the process of localization. The operation was conducted with caution. It was essential not only to accurately determine Escobar's location, but also to prevent him from escaping. Over the next few hours, Colombian military units prepared for a decisive raid. At the same time, American agents relayed information regarding the outgoing call. The intelligence agencies tried to avoid any information leaks, as Escobar still had allies who could warn him of the impending threat. During this time, Escobar was unaware that the police were already close. Pablo was surrounded by several bodyguards he had known for many years. At 11 a.m., he again attempted to call his family. This call would prove to be fateful. Escobar spoke for about 5 minutes, allowing the agents to determine his exact location. The signal was coming from a small house. Colombian troops began to move toward the specified location. Special forces surrounded the house. The police approached closer to block any escape routes. Upon hearing movement outside, Escobar realized he had been found. He quickly grabbed his weapon and, along with his bodyguard, headed to the second floor. The special forces burst into the house. Then Escobar and his bodyguard climbed onto the roof, hoping to escape through the neighboring buildings. However, the police were ready, and a shootout ensued between them. Escobar and his bodyguard continued to run as the gunfire lasted several minutes. At one point, Escobar attempted to jump to the neighboring roof, but one of the special forces officers shot him. The bullet hit him in the back. Soon, another shot rang out, this time hitting him on the head. In the end, Pablo died, and the Colombian police, along with American intelligence, announced the successful conclusion of the operation. Thus ended the story of Pablo Escobar. If you enjoyed watching this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon!